Hello everyone, it's Willa Latham here and welcome to my channel. Today I'm showing two tea sets that have a lot in common and they're also very different. So this is a tea set made in about 1810, 1815 by what was then called the Crown Derby factory. And this is one made in 1899, so that's about 80 years, 75, 80 years later, by Royal Crown Derby, which effectively was the same factory. It's just that at some point in the 19th century, they got the royal title, which of course was a big honor. What these two tea sets have in common is that they're both done in the Imari pattern or the Imari style. And I'm going to tell you what Imari means. You probably have heard the word, it's widely used. The Japanese always made beautiful porcelain for many hundreds of years, way before we did in Europe. And a lot of that porcelain is in this color combination of red, cobalt blue, green, and gold. And a lot of that porcelain was exported to the Dutch or the Portuguese because nobody else could trade with Japan for hundreds of years. It was only the Dutch and the Portuguese who were allowed to trade. And they would import all this stuff before reselling it all over the Western world through the port of Imari, which is a port in Japan. So all this style of porcelain was called Imari. And then, of course, in the 19th century, when British porcelain makers started to make porcelain, they started to make their own Imari patterns just to imitate it. Now, this is a very early one, and it's a very faithful imitation of a Japanese pattern. And I'm going to show you the plate. It's easiest to show it on the plate. It's a very Asian design. See, it's got a very Asian garden scene with a big exotic flower and a little fence. For some reason, the British painters got really obsessed with painting little fences because a lot of Chinese and Japanese designs have these little fences on them, and they got really obsessed with it and put them everywhere, and you see them everywhere. There's one here and there and there. It's funny. And then there's these beautiful details in the border and here too. And they probably originally had a meaning in Japan. I don't know what the meaning is, but I think it's a very beautiful design. It's bold. It's very in your face. It's bold. It's beautiful. Now, the other tea set was made later, 1899, and it's very different. But it's also what you called an Imari palette. But it lost the green, so it's different. It's more simple. And now there are some very big differences here because the first thing that strikes me is that this teapot is massive. I don't know how many cups it pours, but I have a lot of cups here. You can't see them from there, but you know, it pours so many cups of tea. It's really made for a large company. And then also all the items are big. They're made for big hands. So I'm somebody with very big hands, and I really like handling this because I feel like, you know, it's actually the right size for me. And then it has lots of cups and saucers like this. This is a trio. And at the time, cups and saucers came as a teacup and a coffee can. And they share the same saucer because you'd never drink tea and coffee at the same time, would you? So they might as well share a saucer. So there's lots of these. And they're actually also quite big cups. So that's what strikes me about this set. Now, if you go to this set, it's very small. This is small. But then look at the teacups. They are tiny. They're really tiny. And look at the little milk jug. It's very sweet. But it's really all made for tiny little women's fingers. My hands are really a bit too big for these. I feel a bit cautious with this. If you have small hands, you would prefer this one because you would find this a bit big and heavy. So that's quite interesting. It's different. And then also the design is very different because look, it's all very finely drawn here. It's the red is printed and then the gilt is added later by hand. It's all very, very finely drawn. So it's quite different in that sense. And my explanation for that is that in the early 19th century, people had big tea parties. There was a lot of entertaining at home that happened at the time. People would have big dinners, and they would have tea and coffee afterwards, and that's where they would have used this. And there were a lot of gentlemen there as well. It wasn't just women. So the men would use this. So a lot of these things are a bit bigger. They're made for bigger hands, and they're, you know, teapots are big. This is from a different era when women would sort of have their own thing going, and they would have their own little tea sets with little teacups. So it's a different thing. Also, this is in the Georgian era when, you know, if people had money, they would show it. They would just, you know, entertain and have a big teapot and everything big. This is from the Victorian era when, you know, people were also massively rich, probably richer even, but the style was more restrained. It's all a bit sort of restrained. Another big difference is that this pattern is so bold. It's just all over, and it's bold in its colors and its lines, and it's really stunning. This pattern is very finely drawn, as I said, but also, see, it's all hanging. Everything is hanging. This one is very earthy, grounded. This one is all hanging very delicately, and I think it has to do with the Victorian love for garlands. If you look well, these are actually garlands, and this is like a pendant hanging off it. Queen Victoria loved garlands, so you start to see garlands everywhere in design. It's really interesting. So yeah, now you have seen a little bit about the difference one style can make in a span of, say, 75, 80 years. Same company, same style, same inspiration, very different way it has been applied. I hope you enjoyed this. You can find these things in my shop. You can find me at gentlerattleofchina.com. And I also am on Instagram, Gentle Rattle of China. I have daily posts, so please look me up and subscribe. And if you see this on YouTube, please click subscribe so you get my videos every week. Thank you for watching, and see you next week.